if they want to.
And welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DeRienzo. Joan Musi is away this show, but she'll be back next week. And I have Paul Cooperstein and Erica Williams, who are revisiting us to update us on the current legal situation of political prisoner Mumia Abu Jamal, whose picture you see behind me. And welcome, Paul and Erica, to our show, to Let Them Talk. And I look forward to finding out what's been happening with Mumia. So first of all, let's talk a little bit about you, about your qualifications and how you got to be involved in the Mumia case. So Paul and Erica, you're with an organization?
It's the Partisan Defense Committee. Partisan Defense Committee is a class struggle, legal and non-sectarian legal and social defense organization which champions cases and causes whose victorious outcomes are in the interest of the working people. And that purpose is in accordance with the political views of the Marxist-Spartacist League, an organization that publishes the newspaper Workers' Vanguard. We've been involved in Mumia's case going back to 1987. We've been publicizing his case. We've raised funds for his defense, organized protests in his behalf. He's one of the prisoners in our monthly Class 4 prisoner stipends program. And we've also played a key role at various points in his defense and the legal team. We've emphasized in our defense of Mumia, this is a black political prisoner, a former member of the Black Panther Party.
Maybe you could hold this mic here a little bit closer.
A former member of the Black Panther Party, a supporter of the MOVE organization that was much reviled by the Philadelphia police under Frank Rizzo, and whose family was bombed under orders by Black Democratic Mayor Wilson Goode in 1985 for his political views and his outspokenness, and he was framed up on bogus charges of, and sentenced to death on bogus charges of killing a Philadelphia police officer in December 1971, and explicitly sentenced to death for his political views. Statements he made as a 15-year-old spokesman, actually, for the Black Panther Party in Philadelphia. We've emphasized that in fighting for not just against the death penalty, but for his freedom, that you cannot have illusions in the justice of the courts. Mumia's case, like many other Class 4 prisoners, verify that. And there's been mountains of evidence, including a confession of someone who actually shot the police officer that the courts have refused to even hear, and that Mumia is innocent. While others have various times, other groups, whether it be Workers' World Party, International Socialist Organization, other groups have promoted illusions in calling for a new trial for Mumia as opposed to organizing around freeing him. Others currently are now on a campaign to petition Democratic President Obama and his Attorney General Eric Holder to launch a civil rights investigation into
that didn't work very that didn't work very well for Leonard Peltier, who waited for Bill Clinton to free him at the end of his, and instead he freed a Wall Street finagler, actually, who was released at the time. So I can see your point on that, but it's interesting when you talk about freeing. Well, I want to get into the legal case and where that's at too in a moment. But you brought up the whole idea of free Mumia. Now, what would be the physicality of freeing that? I mean, freeing him outside of the courts implies, to me, maybe I'm wrong, a mass of people going in there and freeing him, like physically. Is that, or is that an idea, or is that where you're going with that, or what do you mean by freeing him?
Well, it's a political question. It's what are the forces that can mobilize and raise the political consciousness of people who have been outraged about this case, and particularly raising within the organized workers movement, the multiracial workers movement, where there is social power. What are the stakes in Mumia's case for them? And so if you're promoting the illusion that you can get justice through the courts, if you play it safe and quiet and you bury the evidence of Mumia's innocence, or if you promote illusions in Obama or Eric Holder, who not only has he not only would he not do anything for Mumia, both Obama and Holder are on record as being for the death penalty, but Holder has in fact launched a witch hunt against leftists in the Midwest and extending out as far to California. It's a Chicano activist for 40 years, Carlos Montes, who's being hauled into the courts and trying to throw him into prison as a longtime Chicano activist. So do you educate people who are motivated by such causes of injustice as to how the government works, what purpose the state serves in capitalist society, which is to repress any outpouring against oppression and exploitation, or do you promote illusions in the people who are actually stepping on your throat? And that's the point.
I see what you're saying.
Currently, Mumia, he's still on death row, although the Supreme Court recently turned down an appeal by the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office to reinstate the death penalty. Mumia's death penalty was overturned in 2001 by a federal district court judge on the grounds of faulty jury instructions. That's wended its way back and forth through the courts. Now the DA has until sometime in the spring to decide whether or not to hold a new sentencing hearing for Mumia to try to reinstate the death penalty. The result of that would be either a new death sentence, or Mumia spends the rest of his life in prison, or if they chose not to do that, then he spends the rest of his life in prison, an innocent man. So while it's good that he may not be in the shadow of the death penalty, it is a gross injustice that should anger people, that here's a man in prison for the rest of his life for doing nothing but speaking out and fighting for the oppressed. And he's rightly been called the voice of the voiceless, and he continues to serve in that capacity despite the fact that he's been behind prison bars. As of December 9th, it'll be 30 years.
Wow. So he's already been 30 years, and what role has the organized police, the Fraternal Order of Police and other organizations had in this case, sort of taking the tack that it has? Because others, Dhoruba bin Wahad, he was released after 19 years. Others have been released. Some haven't. Some have. What distinguishes those cases where activists like Mumia have been freed, and cases where the folks like, let's say, Leonard Peltier still are in jail? What distinguishes these type of cases from folks who have been able to get out?
Well,
Erica Williamson.
Hi.
Go ahead. You have a mic. Go ahead.
Well, the Philadelphia Order of Police has been centrally involved in, along with the courts and the rest of the state, but centrally involved in the frame-up of Mumia since 1981. And, at the time of his original, court hearing and conviction, they coerced witnesses. They came up with a phony confession to use against him. Prior to that, they had their eyes, set on Mumia because he was an outspoken opponent of the, particularly nasty police repression that existed in Philadelphia at the time, both against the MOVE organization and against, everyday, Black and Latino people living in Philadelphia. So, from the very beginning, Mumia was in the crosshairs of the FOP in Philadelphia, and they've taken out full-page ads to have this man, see to it that, he be executed. So, by no means are they, neutral in this. They're, completely, on the side of executing Mumia, seeing, making sure that the frame-up continues, and, completely on the side of the capitalist rulers and the capitalist class in general.
Right. So,
can I add one thing?
Yes, go ahead.
You mentioned the Dhoruba case. I would say that cases such as Dhoruba, where somebody who's run afoul of the government and is sentenced to life in prison ultimately walks out while they're still alive, is the exception to the rule. So Mumia is what Mumia has been experiencing, is what many other class war prisoners. So in our program, we
Tell us a little bit about that. Who is in? Hold the mic up a little higher. I'm sorry.
We-
Tell us a little bit about who's in your program and the kind of people who want to follow the law, as you said.
Currently, there's 16 prisoners in our program. Over the course of time since we initiated this in 1986, which was a revival of a tradition in the early communist movement by the International Labor Defense of sending monthly stipends to Class 4 prisoners, both some material support to alleviate their imprisonment, but also a message of solidarity, that they're not forgotten by those outside prison walls, and also to sear the memory of their case, to educate a new generation of fighters and in the working class, radical youth, and so on. Over the course of time, there's been over 30 prisoners, labor activists, fighters for black freedom, national independence across the world. Currently, there's 16 people. In addition to Mumia, there's two Black Panther supporters from Nebraska, Manda Wailanga and David Poindexter. They've been in prison for about 40 years. Ugo Pinell, who was a prison activist, was a comrade of George Jackson's in the Pennsylvania prison system. There's two new leftists, supporters of the Ohio 7, Jan Lahman and Tom Manning, who were new left activist types who took credit, were supporters of an organization that took credit for bombings of symbols of U.S. imperialism. There's
Lynn Stewart.
Lynn's longtime radical attorney who was framed up on ludicrous material support to terrorism charges for doing what a lawyer is supposed to do, defend her client, who happened to be a blind Egyptian sheik who ran afoul of the U.S. government.
And the rest of the MOVE 8 members.
There's seven surviving members of the MOVE organization who've been in prison since 1978, also sentenced to 30 to 100 years in prison, and the government has made it clear that they have no intention of letting them out of prison while they're alive.
Leonard Peltier.
And Leonard Peltier, who you've mentioned, the American Indian activist, world-renowned political prisoner. So these individuals, and these are not the only Class 4 prisoners in the country. We're a small organization. These are people in our program, but these are the norm. And Geronimo G. Jaga Pratt, who passed away this year under health conditions that obviously were related to his 27-year imprisonment. Geronimo was one of the first recipients of our stipend, and we have a long relationship going back to the 70s with Geronimo. He was a man who was framed up and convicted of murder, not sentenced to death because it was in that hiatus where there was no death sentence in this country, but sentenced to life imprisonment and spent 27 years, although the government, federal government, the state government in California, the governor's office, the attorney general's office, knew that he was 400 miles away from a murder that he was sent to prison for. That's the norm.
Sure.
That's what American, you hear these people on the street saying this is what democracy looks like. Well, that's what American democracy looks like, particularly a society, a capitalist society that's built and maintained not just on the exploitation of labor, but on a bedrock of oppression of black people.
Right. Very interesting. So tell us a little bit. First of all, show me, how can people follow up on what we're talking about? Do you have a website or any sort of information along those lines?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Our website is partisandefense.org. And but people in New York or in Chicago this coming weekend can attend our holiday appeal benefit for Class 4 prisoners that Paul mentioned. And
where's that going to be now?
Well, in New York, it's going to be on January 6th at the CWA Union Hall in downtown Manhattan.
You have a poster, you have a leaflet for the event.
Yeah,
here?
we can use this
There
one.
it is.
In Chicago,
I'll
it's
hold
going
it
to
up.
be at the UE Hall on Sunday, December 11th.
There we go. Okay, great. So,
And they can also call us at 212-406-4252 for more information.
One more time, please.
That's 212-406-4252.
406 4252. Okay.
Yes, and
great.
go
We're going to say that again, the number in a few minutes.
Okay.
All right, great. So these are very good. So events, people who come to this Class War benefit, Class War prisoners benefit,
Right.
will be helping finance sending a few dollars to these folks to help them in a stipend with.
Yeah, we send monthly stipends,
Right.
you know, to
And
the
jail.
16.
If anybody's known anybody in jail, and you
Right.
have to give them money in order for them to make
Yeah.
phone calls and talk to you
Yeah.
and buy things in the commissary. Even if they have a job, it pays ridiculous small
Correct.
amount of money. So this is it really helps a prisoner, and I suggest anybody, because a lot of us know someone who's
Yeah.
in jail. You know that the dignity of life is a thin line, and in jail, really your outside friends and the ones who send you these little bits of money sometimes can make all the difference between dignity and lack of dignity.
Sure, and
A roll
all
of toilet paper or
proceeds,
not,
yeah,
you know.
go to our class war prisoner stipends, fund. And we often say, in our press that, it's not an act of charity, but it's an act of solidarity, for those who are in prison, a reminder that they are not forgotten. And I think Paul here has a letter we received recently from one of the class war prisoners that we raise the stipends for.
Right here.
Well, let me point. We a large part of the importance of this is the question of solidarity, and the $25. It may sound like a small amount, and one wonders how much it materially benefits the prisoners. But over the course of the last few years, we've received letters where they tell us about how this supplements their rotten nutrition in prison, how they use it to buy books and other sort of things. We recently got a letter from Jan Lahman for the purpose of our holiday appeal benefits to be read to people coming. And his son, Ricky, passed away very recently, and he wrote us about that. And he wrote us regarding the event we're having, and he says, as all of you know, gathered here at this holiday event, the PDC supports us named prisoners with small monthly stipends. You may not be aware that they also help us give a holiday gift to our children. From the time he was a little boy, Ricky always knew he would receive a Christmas present from me from the Partisan Defense Committee. And as he got older, he would just get the $100 money order directly from the PDC, and it became like a real holiday tradition for us. So this program, it's a very important political program, and it strikes very hard and deeply for the prisoners who should be out here fighting with us to change the society, which is why they're in prison to begin.
Right. That's what I wanted to get to, because we're talking about this so nonchalantly, yet we live in a society, as anybody who's in the last 2 months watched television can see, that barely tolerates any even nonviolent protest. And any sort of questioning of the status quo, which a lot of people have sort of put their stereotypes of what democracy looks like a little bit on the plate to stare at in the last few months, with what we've seen on television. We're supposed to live in a democracy. I mean, how is it that 3 adults are sitting in front of a television camera in New York City and talking about the lack of democracy in New York City, the greatest city in America? What's going on?
Well, Lenin talked about democracy as a sham democracy. It's a democracy for the rich, and it's a sham for the poor, workers, and oppressed, where you get the charade of, in the U.S., it would be every 2 to 4 years to elect those representatives of the capitalist class who pick your pockets and unleash their cops on you. That's what democracy is. And you're not going to have a society without such oppression and exploitation until the capitalist ruling class is swept away. And that would take a workers' revolution. And the history of not just this country, but throughout the world has shown that the capitalist class, the capitalist government cannot be reformed to serve the interests of the oppressed.
Sure.
And I think this is a lesson that, you see today, the Occupy protests, we have this illusion that there's a 99% of society, but within that 99%, you have real class divisions, and you have people who are not who are very high up in that 99%, whose outlook is much more aligned with that 1%, or their aspirations are. And then you have poor black people, immigrants, and the working class, whose labor actually creates the profit that drives the society. and the illusion that there is a sort of an undifferentiated mass of which the working class is part of is something that has been used to keep down the consciousness of the working class, that they have a specific place in the society related to their relations to the means of production. That there's two major classes in society. There's the working class, whose labor produces the wealth, and then there's the capitalist class, which is less than the 1%. It's a small part of that 1% who own the wealth of this society.
Paul Cooperstein, thank you. Let's bring this around. I found that fascinating. By the way, for anybody who has a question about this interesting, the information that we're hearing right now about Mumia, and also, a different view, a different take on what's happening in society around us. I think it's a fresh air to have a critical view. And our number is on the screen, 212-757-1538. And if anybody agrees with what they hear or even disagrees with what they hear, you're free to call in, because we believe in free speech here. So that's our number, 212-757-1538, and I'll keep my eye out. Remember, there's an 8-second delay. We only have a few minutes left, so this is your shot at it. We have two true communists here, or at least two? Maybe some have said I am, but I'm probably half anarchistic. I'm a half anarchist, I'm like the black and red flags down the middle. And I've been that way for a long time, so everybody knows it. So Mumia, let's get it back to Mumia in these last few minutes, because I think it's really important for people to understand what he's facing right now. Life in prison without parole, the rest of his natural life in prison as an alternative to the death penalty. Is that any alternative at all?
Well, it's not death, which is...
You can use this, and you're right.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah.
That, if Mumia is not executed, that's good. But it's clear that the capitalist state, wants to bury Mumia's case, and also bury Mumia, whether that's in prison, for the rest of his living years, or by death and execution. But it's, it's also... a lesson for all of Mumia's supporters, from the time Mumia was in prison 30 years ago, to the 16 or 15 other class war prisoners we defend who've been in prison for over 30 years, they and been rejected, from parole hearings time and time again. It's clear that, they're not. They didn't get their day in court, and they're not going to, because the court is not in the interest of working people, or in particular people who are political and speak out against
How about the chances of
government
actually
repression.
Mumia ever walking free? I mean, is there a chance of that ever happening, in your opinion?
Well, we hope so. That's what we're out here, is to keep Mumia's case, alive. Everyone should be outraged that this innocent man has been in prison for the past 30 years. It's a slap in the face to anyone who stands up against, racism in capitalist America.
How about those detractors who said I think this is a bunch of bull, because when you're innocent until proven guilty, and so therefore you don't have to come out and give the whole story from your own point of view when you're fighting for your life in a trial, when anything you say will be used against you in a court of law. But some have said that Mumia should have come forward with the full story, that he's holding back on the full story.
Mumia from day one has declared his innocence, and it's been the courts who have denied everything from the sworn confession of Arnold Beverly that not Mumia killed Officer Faulkner, to hearing evidence that the key prostitution witness, Cynthia White, lied and pointed out Mumia as the killer and said that she was there. There's been evidence relating the phony confession from a sister-in-law of one of the cops who helped, concoct it up. The courts, are the ones who have, systematically excluded evidence of Mumia's innocence. So Mumia has been, upfront in declaring his innocence, fighting for his freedom, to, overturn his conviction from the very beginning. So,
do you think those critiques those accusations that he hasn't been forthright in telling his story are groundless or baseless?
Well, they're dishonest.
Dishonest.
They're dishonest. Mumia didn't testify at trial. Largely, he felt that they had no case against him. The only thing they had was that he got shot as he approached the scene where the officer Faulkner had been shot. The ballistics don't support that he was shot by Officer Faulkner. The confession by Arnold Beverly points to the fact that Mumia was shot by someone else than Faulkner when he ran up. The initial police lab report said that Mumia was shot by a cop as he came on the scene. So Mumia exercised his right. But although there is a presumption of innocence in the law, the way the courts work, the bourgeois courts work, is if you're someone like Mumia in particular, but not just for Mumia, but for poor people, workers in general, the reality is that you often have to prove that you are innocent. There's a false...
Yeah.
And the idea, Mumia has not only proclaimed his innocence from the beginning, but in conjunction with the other evidence of Mumia's innocence, including the confession of Beverly, he gave a sworn statement that described exactly what happened on that night as far as he remembered, but the courts refused to hear that. So the idea that Mumia has never said what happened is false. It's patently a lie, but it's used to promote the illusion that Mumia is dishonest and hasn't been forthcoming when he has from the beginning.
Right. We saw a lot of the same kind of tactics, just even with the Occupy movement, the media and the different politicians claiming what are your demands and trying to pigeonhole folks into making a demand that can be easily shot to pieces when the underlying demand is some increase in democracy or some change at a basic level. So we can see that the government uses this tactic in many different situations and circumstances.
Yeah, but one thing just to keep in mind in regards to you're mentioning the Occupy protests is that there have been hundreds of protesters arrested during these Occupy protests, but oftentimes you see American flags all over and signs that say, "Hey, cops, you're part of
see that in any labor
the
rally.
workers too," and etc. But the bottom line is that this flag is the blood-drenched flag of U.S. imperialism, and the cops, along with the courts and the military, exist to uphold that. And while hundreds of people have been arrested under both the Democratic Party administration and Obama's administration, he's also
Republican and Democrat. We only have a few seconds. One more. Tell us the phone number and how folks can learn more.
Sure. People can learn more by checking out our website, partisandefense.org. They can also contact us at 212-406-4252.
Holiday Appeal, New York and Chicago. New York
January 6th.
January 6th, Chicago, December 11.
Thank you very much, Paul Cooperstein and Erica Williamson on Mumia with the Partisan Defense Committee. Thank you very much.